We're saying money's not important. However, we're spending our prime time, most of our time, working for the very thing that we say is not important. And then I realized this is insanity. Why don't I just admit to myself that money is important? It doesn't have to be the most important thing, but why not just admit to myself money is important and figure the money thing out?
Welcome to Everyone's Talking Money, where we get brutally honest about money, mindset, and making life richer. What if the reason you still feel unfulfilled, even with a solid income and checked boxes, is because you've been stuck living in the wrong quadrant? In today's episode, I'm joined by Brandon Broadwater, entrepreneur, speaker, and founder of Zallevo. Brandon became a millionaire by 30, but more importantly, he's helped thousands of people break free from survival mode money habits and step into what he calls purpose-driven prosperity. We're talking about the mindsets that keep people stuck, how to stop trading time for money, and why true wealth requires more than just dollars. It requires direction. Let's get into it. Brandon, you talk about purpose-driven prosperity. For our listeners who are financially successful, but still feel like something's missing, how do you help them connect their income to a deeper purpose?
That's a great question. I believe that we live in a world where people are in silent desperation. I believe that a lot of people think they're doing everything they should, and deep inside they're wondering, why am I not happy? And part of the reason why is because there's three levels of living. And those three levels of living are going to determine not only the outcome on where we end financially, but it's also going to determine where our relationships end up, where our financial statements end up. And these three levels of living start at the bottom and working their way up. You have people who are worldly, who are driven by their appetites, one fix to the next. And it doesn't mean it's going to be a drug. It could be, something that's not necessarily the most healthy thing, but it could be eating unhealthy, for example. And the worldly are driven by their appetites, and unfortunately, they have a hard time in this world because they keep hitting the life of hard knocks, right? And then you have the next level up, which are honorables, and this is where you'll find most people. These are good people. Honorables or living the life of honorableism. You have people that are doing what they feel like and they know is good. And they feel like they're doing all the things that they should, but yet inside they know something's missing and they don't know what it is. And the problem with honorableism is that honorables think that they're at the top, but they're not. They're unaware of what's called the gap. And the gap is something that exists between honorables and Valiant. And Valiant is the highest level. And Valiant is where people find fulfillment. Valiant is where people find purpose. And the best way I can describe this is using a very simple example of children, right? So I have 5 kids, and my oldest is 21, my youngest is 14. I have two boys and then 3 girls in the middle. I've learned a lot, still learning as well as a father. But here's one thing I taught my kids that my 21-year-old came back to me and said, "Dad, are you still teaching this to my younger brothers and sisters after I moved out?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Please do, because it's made all the difference in my life. I didn't realize that you were preparing me so well to go into the world." So this is the story I told my kids. I said, a worldly kid, when mom or dad asks them to do the dishes, says they start whining. Well, why me? Why do I have to do this? Why me, right? An honorable kid, if they're asked to do the dishes, they'll go do the dishes. A valiant kid, if asked to do the dishes, they'll do the dishes. And then if they notice the floor needs to be swept, they will sweep the floor without being asked. And that's where you start to get into the valiant mindset or the valiant level of living. So when you talk about the different approaches in finding fulfillment, this gap that exists between honorable and valiant is not just a small gap. It is a massive gap, because the difference between those who are valiant versus those who are honorable is huge. And the honorables, the reason why it's so confusing is because it's not what they've done that's amiss. It's what they've left undone where they go off track. And it's the opportunities where they could have done something, but they don't. And a lot of times this is in the area of service or getting outside themselves. And so people ask, well, how do I close the gap if I want to go from honorable to valiant? And the way you close the gap is as simple as saying to get outside yourselves. Now, financially, earning money in ways that help us to get outside of ourselves, that help to have an impact and make a difference in other people's lives, makes all the difference in the world for finding fulfillment. If all we're doing is exchanging our time for money, we have a higher purpose than that. We can do better than that, right? That's called selling out. If we're just going to go exchange our time for money and not have some type of purpose behind it, then I believe that is going to lead to unfulfillment and potentially settling. And that's where honorables are. It's not what they've done, it's what they've left undone. And if there's an opportunity to go do something to earn income or to help other people earn incomes, and we don't take it because instead we may settle for security and I don't want to take a risk, then there might be some honorableism in there. And I'll be the first to admit, I still today tap into honorableism. And when I recognize it, I start stepping out of it as quickly as I can because I don't want to live a life of mediocrity.
So would you say having a purpose is what helps you rise up the ranks, if you will, from worldly to honorable to valiant, is having that purpose? Because I would say a lot of people would end up worldly, like especially you use the example of the kids washing the dishes, like, oh, I don't feel like doing that. Why do they have to do that? Right. I think, is that a normal reaction and we have to train ourselves to think differently?
I believe, I will say absolutely. We all have a part of us that's lazy, that wants to whine and wants to take the easy route. And if we listen to that worldly part of ourselves, or, you think about the old Lion King cartoon, right? You have the lion who goes the extra mile and does the right thing. You have the hyenas who are always trying to take a shortcut, right? All of us have that lion and hyena inside of us, or we can call it the ego self that wants to take the shortcut. And we can look at the pattern of people's lives who take a worldly approach. And what happens is life keeps hitting them in the face over and over and over again. Do we all have a tendency or a part of us that may want to go that direction? Maybe. But I found that there's a momentum to valiance. And the more we're stepping into valiance, the more it becomes natural and the less enticing it is to do anything that would be worldly. In fact, it becomes something that's very unappealing after living in valiance for a while to do anything worldly because you know where it goes and it's just not who we are. I can think about even this last weekend. We came back from a boating trip in Lake Powell. It's a famous lake and it's red rock everywhere. The walls are 1,000 feet high in some areas and you drive boats up it and it's really beautiful. But we got back and we went with some other families in our neighborhood, and I remember as I was unloading the boat, one of the gals, my buddy's wife, pulled up. Her name was Aubrey, into our driveway, and she was loading her car as I was unloading the boat. And later on that night, I was having a nice conversation with her, and I was doing my part. She was doing hers. Later on that night, as I was going to bed, I realized, I'm like, you know what? That was a valiant opportunity that I missed where I could have gotten down out of the boat and helped her load her car, even though I was in the process of unloading her own stuff. But the investment in that relationship or taking that opportunity to serve was an opportunity that was left undone. And I'm not saying we play guilt trips and do that with ourselves, but I'm genuinely recognizing an opportunity that was left undone for me to get outside myself, where if I did that, she would have been thinking, wow, Brandon got right down and he helped me load my own car when he was in the middle of doing something. And for me, that's who I want to be. So it's something I strive to do. And that's what the valiant do. The standard is not perfection. The standard is to strive to be valiant, which means you get back up and you get back up fast. It doesn't mean you're perfect. You don't beat up on yourself. If you make a mistake, you simply make it right and you get up and go.
So tell me about the exchange of time for money and that trap that people end up in.
Absolutely. So about 15 years ago, I created something called the Prosperity Quadrant. That's one of our federal registered trademarks. And the Prosperity Quadrant, I want you to, for those of you that are listening right now, You can do this in your mind if you're driving, or you can do it on a piece of paper. So draw a plus sign, which is a quadrant, right? And there's going to be in the top left is a P, and that stands for poor. In the bottom left, you have M for middle class. So on the left-hand side of this quadrant, you have the poor and middle class. So the left-hand side of this quadrant has some dynamics about it that are very different than the right-hand side of this quadrant. So the right-hand side of this quadrant, on the top right, you have the letter R, which stands for rich. And so you have the poor, middle class, and then the rich on the top right, but it also stands for residual income. And we're going to talk about that. And then the bottom right-hand corner is an interesting quadrant. It's the letter A, which represents the abundant quadrant. So my grandpa, who inspired me and continues to inspire me today, he lived till he was 102 years old, by the way, and was completely healthy. The only reason he passed away is he fell down, hit his kidney, and he had kidney shut down. And he says, all right, I'm out, guys. Call everybody up. And he was completely aware, talked to everybody, very healthy guy. But he taught me a lot. And he was a multi-millionaire by the time he was in his 50s. And being back in, 50 years ago, that was a lot of money. So my grandpa was a great teacher for me, not only financially, but how to live a life of abundance. So he asked me the question, Brandon, do you want to be poor and abundant, right? That's the top left and the bottom right of the quadrant. Do you want to be poor and abundant? Do you want to be middle class and abundant? Or do you want to be rich and abundant? I said, well, if I have a choice, I want to be rich and abundant, right? Why not? But he also pointed out that you don't need to be rich to be abundant. See, let's define these quadrants before we continue. So the abundant quadrant is the quadrant that represents the things that money cannot buy. It represents happiness. It represents contribution. It represents making a difference in people's lives and also feeling like you're making a difference in people's lives. It represents bonded relationships, right? This is an abundant quadrant. So this represents relationships that are bonded, and we're able to do that and create that in our lives. So when we talk about being abundant and we're checking the box on that bottom right quadrant, we're talking about living a life that is fulfilling, that you have joy and you love your life. So when he asked me, do you want to be poor and abundant, middle class and abundant, or rich and abundant? You don't have to be rich to be abundant. You don't have to be rich to be happy. You can just travel the world and go to a third world country. My daughter just came back from the Philippines. We send each of our kids on a trip for 3 weeks. When they're 16, 17, or 18 years old, they get one trip to go to a third world country and go serve. And so she went and built schools and she slaved away. They went to a couple of tourist spots, but she got to see what it was really like. And she came back and said, Dad, whole families are living in homes that are the size of my bedroom, right? They're the size of my bedroom. That's a small house. A big house is the size of our kitchen and living room that are combined. And that's a big house. That's the whole family. Nobody gets their own room. And she said, but they're so happy. They don't need anything. That's not even on their minds to go and get things, right? And so I love sending our kids on those trips with HXP because it allows them to get that type of experience and that service. And they do it with a bunch of other teenagers, and they take their cell phones at the beginning of the trip at the airport. No cell phones the entire time. So the only way we hear about them is from the big Facebook group that the counselors put photos on and what they're doing. So it's just great for them to check into a whole new world. And my point with that is the poor quadrant does not mean you're a failure. It's simply identifying usually your mindset and the way you make money. So let's talk about the poor quadrant. The poor quadrant represents those who are in survival mode financially, right? They're in survival mode. They do not know the principles of money. In the middle class, however, there's nothing wrong with middle class. Just because they have their own quadrant, don't take it as being targeted that there's something wrong. You can live a good life in the middle class. I know plenty of people who have great families, they live good lives, and they're middle class and abundant. However, it's important to have a quadrant that identifies the middle class so you know where you're at, because if you know where you're at, you might have and you can see there's other quadrants, you might decide that that's not where you want to be where you're at. So let's talk about what the middle class are. The middle class, in all honesty, are the backbones of economies. The middle class are important. They play a role. You just have to decide if you want to be middle class, because you don't have to be in the middle class quadrant. And I know this because of myself. I grew up, and at one point, my father died when I was young. My mom was a single mother, and she was on food stamps. I remember what it was like as a kid. I also remember when she graduated from college. My mom is awesome. She taught me how to fight because she went back to school. She was working 2 jobs at the same time. And I remember when she graduated college, we suddenly got a new car. We got an upgrade in our home. My friends changed, and I moved to a different neighborhood, a completely different experience. However, the middle class are in a situation where they make money by exchanging their time. Both the poor middle class. In fact, that left-hand side of the quadrant, that's how they make their money, is they exchange their time for money. So the middle class are in a situation where they have a culture or a mindset. And I know this because I graduated in radiology. I graduated as a radiology technician. I was going to school. I was going to work. I worked at a place called Primary Children's Hospital. I was there for a few years, and I remember the mindset. And the mindset is this. You talk to your other friends as you're at work. You say, money's not important. Money's not important. That's what the middle class say to themselves. However, think about it for a minute. Let me ask you a question. How do you know where a person's priorities are? How do you know where a person's priorities are? What's a dead giveaway for where a person's priorities really are, regardless on what they say?
How they spend their time.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's where they spend their time. So the next question is, where do the middle class spend most of their time? And we're not talking about just time. We're talking about prime time, which means the most alert and awake hours of the day. Where do they spend most of their time?
At work.
At work. And then the question is, working for what? And the answer is money. I remember sitting in my radiology classes looking across all the people who were there, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, we're not in a radiology class. We're in a financial class here, because if there was no money on the other side of doing all this schoolwork, this classroom would be 100% empty. So let's not fool ourselves. If you got a pay reduction for going to class, how many people are going to show up, right? So in reality, we go to work in the middle class and we say to ourselves, money's not important. However, here's the insanity of it. And I had to admit this to myself. I remember as a student in radiology, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm telling myself, I'm talking to my friends here at work. We're saying money's not important. However, we're spending our prime time, most of our time, working for the very thing that we say is not important. And then I realized, this is insanity. Why don't I just admit to myself that money is important? It doesn't have to be the most important thing, but why not just admit to myself, money is important, and figure the money thing out? And I'll tell you what, that's where things really started to change for me.
Well, do we say money isn't important as almost a defense mechanism because we maybe know subconsciously or think subconsciously, well, I'm never going to be rich, quote unquote, whatever rich is. So by saying, well, money's not important to me, that's kind of like the way to go, give permission to and make it okay of, well, I'm never going to be rich.
I think you're nailing it right there, because we do those things to ourselves. And unfortunately, we slip into mindsets of unawareness, or we have lack of awareness, where we check ourselves out of what can be. And I believe, as when I was in radiology, that's why I created such waves. I didn't mean to, it wasn't my intent, but I had to call my grandpa for advice. I called grandpa up and I said, hey, grandpa, I'm 2 weeks away from graduation, and I'm putting my 2-week notice in to never work in radiology again, because I just replaced my income and what it would be after graduation. I don't need to work. I've created the residual income. And I said, however, grandpa, my question is this: why is my world turning upside down? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, a third of the people here at work don't care. And a third of the people that know I'm doing this, they asked questions like, how are you retiring? How are you creating your own income residually after all the schoolwork? And how are you doing this? And so I'd be working in radiology and I'd be in the dark rooms doing x-rays and I'd go and start working on something. I hear this, "Psst, hey, Brandon," in a dark room, right? Kind of creepy, but not just joking. And it's one of my coworkers saying, "Hey, come here." And they'd come up to me and say, "How'd you do it? How'd you do it? What'd you do?" Right. And these are people who are inspired. They were hungry to learn. And then I quickly found out that there was also another third that completely resented me for my own success. And I didn't understand this. I didn't realize what the path of success starts to create. And what it creates is disruption. And I remember one lady came up to me and says, "So what'd you do? Did you just do this on purpose? You just come to radiology for fun and make fun of us and leave?" And she's been working in radiology for 25 years. And I said, "No, this has nothing to do with that. I didn't know I could be successful this fast, right? Radiology was my plan until I could figure it out, and it just worked out much faster than I thought." I remember as I was packing my locker and my school books out, I opened up one of the radiology books, pulling out loose papers, and I had written my goals. That was 2 years prior. And I said at that point, I want to be able to own a business that has residual income. And I hope I can own maybe one or two rental properties in 2 years. Well, I was at that 2 year mark and I had over 15 rental properties. And I blew my own expectations out of the water. And I did this as a broke college student. It was totally broke. So it's interesting because as I called my grandpa and said, "This is what's going on here," he said, "Well, Brandon, part of living a successful life is you got to have thick skin. And you got to realize that a third of the people are going to hate you or not like you. A third of the people aren't going to care. And a third of the people are going to be inspired." And he said, "Note this as well. If you plan on teaching or helping other people, or if you plan on doing a business that makes a difference in people's lives, your goal is to take those third that don't care and convert them as well so they can be inspired." I thought that was an interesting commentary. But he said, the reason why people are upset is because you force them to look at themselves. He says, you're not meaning to do anything. Your goals are your own goals and you're shooting for it. You're going for your dreams. But the fact that you're doing that forces other people to look at what they're doing. And that creates disruption.
I'm just going to say what probably the listeners are thinking. How does a broke college student, because we all were one, right? At some point, we were all broke. How does a broke college student obtain rental properties and create wealth for himself before even graduating?
So the best way to answer that is to say this. I became a millionaire because somebody showed me how. I wasn't smarter than anybody else. I had somebody who showed me how to do it. And I was able to follow a system. That makes all the difference. I also was willing to give up what I call being a solopreneur, which means I have to do everything. I'm the smartest one in the room. Instead, I accepted the fact that maybe I'm not the smartest one in the room, but maybe the smartest thing to do is to listen to someone who's done this before. And that is people who are on the right-hand side of the quadrant. Now we're talking about the rich and abundant. The rich are people, you got to be careful. I'm not saying to take advice from the rich. I'm saying take advice from the rich and abundant, because you can find people that are very wealthy, but they have a paper trail of destroyed relationships, unhappiness, and they're not fulfilled. Their health has been completely destroyed in the process of getting wealthy. And now they're spending their money trying to get their health back. Like, that is not rich and abundant. So when I say that I became a millionaire because somebody showed me how, I'm being completely honest, but I was listening and I was very careful to listen only to those who were rich and abundant. I wanted to make sure that they had happy families, and I wanted to make sure they also had that light in their eyes, that they were happy, that this wasn't an ego thing, that they weren't trying to have more, posturing for people, that they genuinely had lives that were fulfilling to not only themselves but to other people, that they had some level of intention to make a difference in other people. And you can tell you can tell where people spend their time, and you can tell by the way people talk. Are they vulnerable? Do they talk about their hard lessons? Do they talk about um, not putting priorities first when they should have, and that they've learned those things? Or are they closed up and they're not willing to share anything about their past? It's like, oh, why are you not talking about your life, right? They're only talking about money, and that gets me concerned. I want to know that they're rich and abundant, and that's why I listen to my grandpa. My grandpa, uh, I owe everything to him, and I also owe everything to my wife, who's been supportive and amazing through this incredible process of the last more than 20 years now that we've been married. So the rich and abundant quadrant, the way that we can have that success in a predictable way, the way a broke college student can do that, is hanging out with people on the right hand side of the quadrant who are rich and abundant and following a simple system. So let me describe that in better detail. You can create a system or you can join a system. Now, a lot of us who are independent and who have great ideas and are passionate, we're thinking, well, I'm just going to create it. I can do it, right? That is true, but we've got to talk about speed. We've got to talk about speed here. And as we talk about speed, we need to ask ourselves, do we want to build the system? Do we want to build a business, or do we want to join a business? And those are two different things. We have to ask ourselves, how fast do I want the success? And sure, there is a sense of accomplishment and ownership when you create the system, when you get to be the one who creates a business for residual income. And you ask me, how does a broke college student create residual income? Not only did I learn from the rich and abundant and spent time with them, and you got to be careful because that prosperity quadrant those are 4 different worlds. Those have 4 different gravitational effects mentally with our mindsets. So if you hang out with people that are in the middle class mindset, you will think like the middle class. You start hanging out with people that are rich and abundant, you will think differently. For example, those listeners, for those that are listening right now, you can't help but start to have your mindset go more towards rich and abundant just by hanging out with the two of us today. Because we're talking about how the rich and abundant think. We're talking about what they do. And they admit that money is important. They admit that it doesn't have to be the most important thing. But the second you prioritize and say, I am no longer going to have money control me, because that's what happens in the left-hand side of the quadrant in the poor middle class. I'm going to figure out the money thing so that I can do what I want with my time, whether that's hiking and enjoying beautiful rainforests, or that's spending time serving others, or spending time with family and friends, or all of it. If you want to create a residual income, the fastest way to do that is to join a system, not create the system. So through all the years of Master Your Power Within, when I was traveling around and training entrepreneurs, it's amazing to me to look back and see, yes, there are several millionaires today that came out of those trainings that I put on how to build a great business, how to build a culture, how to build a brand, what colors to use for certain branding, what they communicate. But I also realized that the learning curve to build a successful business and real estate portfolio, to do it on your own, especially coming from the poor and middle class part of the prosperity quadrant, you have to have a mentor to get you there. Or else, at least I did, or else I would not have had the mindset to overcome the challenges that come. The speed comes when you find a system that's already built and you join a cause that aligns with your higher purpose. And everybody's, if you want to call it a higher purpose or their why, if it's going to be something real and substantial, it needs to be something that contributes to other people's lives. Otherwise, I would say it doesn't even check the box of being a higher purpose. You can have a purpose. It's just not a higher purpose. It's not meaningful unless you're contributing to someone else's lives. We have a core value around here that's called greatness. And in order to achieve greatness, it says that we know that our highest contribution is by helping others. We know that we cannot achieve our highest potential without helping others achieve theirs. You can't do it. It is, they call it the laws of the universe, is what my grandpa taught me. That in order for us to achieve our highest potential, we have to help other people achieve their potential. And if your purpose is to go onto a beach and sit there and relax and drink on drinks, that is not purpose enough to get the wheels of the universe to engage on your behalf. However, when we start to have the intent to contribute to other people's lives, this universe will help you. The wind will start to blow in your cells. And yes, miracles and magic can happen in this planet that I've discovered. And that's what my grandpa taught me. So to simplify the answer, to have speed, you can join a business or you can create one. To create one, I've seen a lot of people try and they burn out trying to get there. Joining a business, you can do so and achieve residual income much quicker. So I remember that's one of the reasons today why I have a company called Zallevo. If you had a camera right now, you would see behind me that there's a lot of these beautiful health products. So I created a health company where as people share these health products, they can get residual income for doing so. And our goal is, and what I do is I help people to earn an extra $500 to $1,000 a month. And let's define income here because we're talking about a side gig, right? A lot of you might have jobs already. A lot of you might have ways to make money. However, it might not be on the right-hand side of the quadrant money, which means residual income. So the way to make residual income is through real estate or business. And you ask me, how does a college student do that? Or what kind of advice would I give to somebody starting if they are just starting out like a college student, which means not a lot of money? The best way to do it is in business because real estate, depending on the market, takes capital. And if it doesn't take capital, then you've got to get investors and hard money. And there's a lot of things that I did at that time where I convinced a doctor to loan me money and I had hard money and I refinanced it out and got a regular loan with Chase Bank and Wells Fargo and paid off the hard money lender. And there's ways you can do that, but there's markets where that works and there's markets where that doesn't work. And right now, we are in a market where inflation has raised prices in real estate and the interest rates are high at the same time. So to do that same thing will not be as predictable as and successful as the market that I was in. It doesn't mean you're out. What it means is you take the approach of a business. Because if you make extra money doing a side gig, then you will have the down payment and capital to get all the real estate you want. So summary of what I'm saying, focus on income. What kind of income? Summary of what I'm saying, residual income. What is residual income? Residual income is the income that comes in consistently every month after you do the effort once. So, for example, one of the reasons why I help people make $500, $2,000 a month of residual income is, and the ways that I help them is they have beautiful products. We have high retention because they're not cheap. They're amazing. People feel great when they take them. And if they go share these products, we have seen that people stay on these products for years because they feel a difference. They feel great. Who wouldn't want to have the best, right? And what happens is they get a piece of each sale and everybody's on subscribe and save. If we're going to talk about side gigs and residual income, let's talk about what is not residual income. And we'll talk about a side gig of being a driver, a delivery driver like Uber, right? You have to be in the car driving to get that extra money. You can't go drive once and then somehow have Uber continue to pay you month after month. People would call you insane for even thinking that way. But you see, that's middle class thinking. That's not insane. That's a normal daily, monthly experience for those on the right hand side of the quadrant. So how do you do this? And how do you do it quickly? How do you have speed? Join a system instead of trying to create it. I have watched people try for 3, 4, and 5 years trying to create businesses. You got to create branding, you got to market. There's so many things you got to do. If you and I do not dial in our physical body, our mindset suffers. And as an entrepreneur or as a person who wants to create residual income, energy equals money. And if we cannot get our bodies, our physical bodies and our minds into a peak state, then our financials will show it. Our income will suffer because we don't have the energy to reach our dreams. So I'm very passionate about tuning in our bodies and minds so we have the energy to do this. Now, when you join a business, you don't have to spend $8 million that I spent doing this. You don't have to go raise the capital from investors. You don't have to spend, $4 million filling the warehouses. You don't have to build a website. You don't have to build the branding. You don't have to on and on and on, do all the attorneys, trademarks, patents, all that stuff is done. And instead you find something that makes a difference in people's lives and you share it. That just saved you 5 to 10 years of your time because you don't have to build the business. Now you can just start sharing. So Speed, I personally stopped going out and training people as a coach like I was in Master Your Power Within, because in that setup, I was making ridiculous amounts of money, but I would make money whether my students had success or not. That all changed when I started Zallevo. I only succeed now as other people succeed. And I think that levels the playing field. That means we're both running the same direction. That means we have an alignment of interest. That means you win, I win. If you don't win, I don't win. And I like that setup. Now that means I have skin in the game for each and every person that is a part of this family that's striving for valiance, that's striving for greatness. And that's what we do around here.
For someone who's achieved financial success but still feels unfulfilled, what would your first recommendation to help them unlock their next level of purpose and prosperity?
I would say have a morning routine and stick with it. What does that mean? We need to get our brains in the game. We need to create some momentum in our own lives. We can't wait for an opportunity to happen. We can't look out in life and say, hey, there's that person that got a home run. I want my home run. I'm ready. I want my chance. We create chances around here. Well, one of our core values is about optimism. And part of optimism is and is finding the opportunities in each day. And doing that means that we have to take ownership on how we approach each day. If we want to win in this life, we need to step into each day to win. And to do that, we've got to have a good morning routine, which means when we wake up, we have to have some routines to get our bodies in motion. Whether we like it or not, these human bodies of ours greatly influence our mindset. So we talked about poor, middle class, rich, and abundant. We've still got to prime our minds. We need to get our brains in the game with some level of exercise each morning. Some people do it at night, but we've got to do something to start our days right. So I've discovered a couple things that are really helpful in doing that. Number one is get our bodies in motion. Strength training has a lot of clinical research that is showing that if we want to age well, if we want to grow old and have the ability to move and go do the things you want, strength training is critical. Not just cardio, not just getting out and walking, not just running. It is the actual resistance against pressure, a resistance against weights. With women, it's critical for bone density. They have found nothing else that is more impactful to having high bone density than resistance training. It is absolutely critical. My wife and I were out hiking here in this beautiful sunny St. George, Red Rock country. It's known as the adult Disneyland of the United States. There's fun things everywhere. And we're hiking up this hike, and it was pretty steep. And we're like, I don't know if we're going to make it to the top. And this was 10 years ago. So I'm 47 years old. I was 37 at the time. She was 35. And these people who are like, I'm not kidding, they were in their late 70s pass us. And they're like, how? And we didn't have a problem getting to the top after that. But it's amazing because we live in a community of people who come and retire here because they figured some things out. One, it's awesome here, but they've also figured out how to take care of themselves, and they're very active. You ask these people what they're doing, they're not only outdoor and doing hiking and walking, they're doing strength training when you talk to these people, and it's important. Your muscle will you'll lose muscle with time. Now, I've talked about longevity. Let's talk about the day. We need to get out of our own way. There is no better way to get out of our own way than to get our butts in motion by having an hour of power in the morning. So a couple years ago, I stopped doing my meetings before 10 a.m. Now, granted, I can control my own schedule right now, and I feel grateful I can do that. But I stopped taking meetings before 10 a.m. because I realized that I could push harder, try harder, and put more effort into it and more hours. I've done the 60-hour work weeks. I've done 80-hour work weeks. I've been unbalanced in my relationships. I've had my wife come and tell me, you're putting the business above family. I've had these hard lessons through the years. As I've gotten older, I've realized that if I do my first meetings at 10 a.m. and I can do a good workout in the morning, make sure I get a beautiful protein shake, I can approach these meetings and I can go to work for 3 or 4 hours and have 10 times the outcome that I would if I worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now I can work from 10 to 2 or 10 to 3 and have 10 times the output because my brain's in the game. I can see opportunities, I can reflect, and that makes all the difference. So to answer your question, we really need to get out of our own way. We really do. And to do that, we need to exercise. The next thing we need to do is realize that, and this is sad, but we have lived in a country, I hope things are changing, where people's understanding of getting our bodies healthy is out of whack. I'm a believer that even people at a level of nutritionists who are nutritionists, they've been influenced by the food industries. All the education at that level, at that, I'll call it the bottom level of our health organizations, they're using approaches and measurements in health that are not necessarily the best. And the way you can contrast this is go up to the highest level of PhDs and compare what they're saying to nutritionists. So one of my favorite PhDs to listen to, and go check him out, and this is how we get out of our own way, is Dr. Ben Bikman, Bikman. He's a PhD in bioenergetics. Bioenergetics. We're talking about energy here. How do we get out of our own way? This is the guy, if you go look at all the health podcasts out there, he's the number one guy they're interviewing. You don't want to talk to your medical doctor. Medical doctors have less than a week of training of nutrition in their whole medical school. That is not where you go. Nutritionists are influenced by the big industry. However, Dr. Ben Bikman, he is an outlier that there's other doctors who you can say have gone rogue, who have left their daily clinics, who have been practicing for 20 years, and say, we know what's working and it's not what Big Pharma is recommending. And what they're saying is this, and I'll quote Dr. Ben Bikman. He said, 80% of all our diseases that we will ever get in our lives, regardless of our genetics, is going to be triggered, which means it's the first domino to start a whole domino of diseases in our lives, is going to be triggered by high insulin and high glucose. What does that come from? It comes from sugars and carbohydrates. So when I started to focus on exercising in the morning, and one easy, simple thing to focus on of all health, and that is to keep your insulin and glucose low. What that will do is it will take you on a journey of learning and paying attention to whatever you're eating that day or what you're doing throughout the day. What can you do instead? And that means lots of proteins, and make sure you fill up on proteins. That's the easiest thing you can do. Fill up on proteins, and the right kind of fats are actually really good. Fats don't make you fat. I don't know why they ever even called it that. They shouldn't have even called it that from the beginning because it's misleading. But fats are the things that send the fastest signal to your brain that you're satiated. But if we're eating carbs, you're just going to be stuck in a carb cycle that's completely destructive. So by just doing that, what's going to happen is you're not going to have the 10 a.m. energy crash. You're not going to have the 2 p.m. energy crash that usually occurs after a carb breakfast and a carb lunch. Instead, what happens on the other side of this is you're going to have constant, awesome energy. Your mood, when you're talking about, and if you're not really feeling it, your mood is an entirely different experience being on the planet. So just those two things, having exercise, especially strength training, and mitigating your glucose and insulin spikes, is going to have very high short-term return on investment and very high long-term return on investment. They are identifying all the brain diseases, Alzheimer's, things like that are coming from glucose issues. Guys, I'm going to get health here. I know we're on a money podcast, but erectile dysfunction, those are metabolic syndromes. You're going to have that problem in your 40s and 50s. It's coming if you keep spiking your glucose. You're going to trigger you're going to be triggering the first domino that's going to trigger the biggest disease in your life by spiking glucose. So it is a really big deal. And the reason I created Zallevo is we have glucose intelligent technology that does not spike your glucose, and you can drink a nice watermelon lime, you can drink a pink hibiscus, you can drink these sweet drinks, and our technology makes it so you have almost an imperceptible touch on your glucose. There's no more stopping at the gas station to get these sweet drinks that are wrecking your ability to make money, wrecking your ability to be the best mom or dad, wrecking your ability to have the patience or the energy that you need to be to create additional income. These are real things that will change the output of your ability to make money